To build a gaming board or buy a gaming mat, that is the question here today on the Storycraft Society. Let's go. Happy Thursday and welcome back to another episode of the Storycraft Society. My name is Garmin, and here today we are going to be doing the follow-up from last week's video. So if you haven't checked that video out, we actually reviewed Frontline Gaming Mats. That's my favorite gaming mat and the one that I use all the time here on the channel. And this week's video is actually going to be me kind of doing a compare and contrast because I wanted to know the difference. Is it worth it to build a gaming board, or does it just make more sense to spend the money and buy a gaming mat? So this video is going to be split up into two parts, but we're going to start with building a gaming board. I've needed a city block for a while now, so that's what we're gonna start with. Now, I'm not gonna go super crazy in depth into this, and a lot of the techniques I've talked about in older videos. Of course, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. But then the second half of the video is gonna be me doing a direct comparison and me giving you all my thoughts on whether I think that building a gaming board is worth it or maybe buying a gaming mat is worth it. I don't know yet. We're gonna find out. So let's dive into the first part of this video, building a gaming board. So to start this project off, I pulled out my inch-thick XPS insulation foam, that's expanded polystyrene, and I cut out a 30-inch by 24-inch piece. The next thing that was really important for me to do was to mark out where the sidewalks go. And this process I did a couple of different ways. One was by eye. I just kind of guessed where I thought things would go, gave myself a general idea, and then I also pulled out some of my buildings and started to set them out onto the sidewalk pieces so that I could get a general idea of, if I laid this piece out, where I could put my pieces and what they could do and that sort of thing. For anyone who cares, one side I made my sidewalk 10 inches deep, and on the other side, I made it 12 inches deep, but I think that that's absolutely a nonsensical measurement because you can make yours whatever fits your terrain the best. Your size stuff is definitely gonna be different than my size stuff, so I think it's always worth it to take the time and measure it to your stuff, not just base it off of like arbitrary measurements that I used for mine. After we got all that done, it was time for the tedious part of this build, and when I say tedious, gosh, I mean tedious. I cut out a ton of bricks. Spoiler alert, I actually ended up having to cut out more bricks than this in 2 separate occasions, which that's how it goes when laying bricks sometimes, and I started laying them all down. The way that I did that was I pulled out my Eileen's tacky glue. This is my favorite glue to use because it really grabs the bricks right away, where I feel like other white glues, like Elmer's glue for example, doesn't seem to really grab the brick immediately. So I put the Eileen's tacky glue down, and then I just got into laying the bricks. This is a really good time to put on a podcast. I just happened to be listening to the Inspiration Point podcast, which is a super fun like DM podcast. If you haven't checked it out, you definitely should. I will link that in the description below as well. Then I got to laying bricks, and I just laid bricks and laid bricks and laid bricks until it was done. I really like this method a lot more than carving bricks because it gives a cool 3D aspect to the bricks that is going to end up being one of the selling points of building your own gaming board compared to using a gaming mat. But we'll get to that a little later. Whoop, almost forgot to mention, the bricks that I laid were 3/8 of an inch by 1/2 inch. Again, that is such an arbitrary measurement, and you could measure them out to be as big or as small as you want. The thing that I always try to remember with the size of the bricks that I cut is the smaller the brick, the longer the process is gonna take, but the more realistic they're gonna look. And the larger the brick, the quicker the process is gonna go, but the less realism you're gonna get. For me, that 3/8 of an inch by 1/2 inch block size, that's my sweet spot for what is the most realistic with the least amount of work, and I think that that measurement is going to be different for everybody. Anyway, moving on. Now I wanted something to separate my blocks from my street, and I figured that curb blocks would be the best way to do this. This was actually a really easy process, and it's something that I think really steps the piece up and makes it look a lot nicer. So what I did was I cut out strips of foam core. I let them be the 3/16 inch thickness, but then I made them 1/16 of an inch taller than the bricks that I laid for my sidewalks. That let them stick up and have a little bit of visual interest but not look overdone. And then I cut them into 2-inch segments, textured them up with my tin foil ball, and then they were ready to be glued in place. I just used hot glue here because I wanted something to dry really fast, and they just dropped in right in place. And I'll tell you, by the time I got them glued in, I just felt like the piece was really starting to take off, and it was really, really starting to look cool. The next thing that we had to do was do our street. I wanted the street to have like a dirt look to it, and the easiest way that I have found to do that is with just regular old sand. So what I did was I laid down another layer of Eileen's tacky glue all over, and then I poured sand onto the piece, and as I did that, then I of course tapped it down to make sure that the sand gets a nice, good, solid bond. I let that dry, and then once it's dry, you take it outside and you just tap off all that extra sand, and you get a really, really nice dirt street texture. Another nice little surprise is the way the glue actually got pushed up against my curb blocks. It actually looked like dirt kind of got pushed up against the sidewalks. A nice little added benefit that I didn't intend, but it makes the piece really kind of stand out and look nice. So now we needed to seal the whole thing in. What we're gonna use for that is, you know it, you love it, Blackmagic Craft base coat. This is a 50-50 mixture of matte Mod Podge and black acrylic craft paint. And what this does is two things. One, it gives us a black base coat, but also it hardens our foam and is going to seal in our sand. Really, really useful, and it's gonna really give this thing a nice, solid finish for us to start putting paint on. Once that was base coated, then it was time to paint. Now, I'm not gonna go super in-depth into the painting. If you actually go to the Lazy Crafter's Guide to Painting on the channel here, it will give you 100% way that I did everything here. These are the colors that I used. I used a dark brownish kind of gray, I used a medium gray, and then I used a tan to do my highlights for the stone. Then on the dirt road, I actually went a lot brighter. I wanted more of a worn, dry dirt look that's really like been compacted down over the years. So what I decided to use for that was a light brown to a tan, and then actually my highlights were an antique white. That antique white really kind of sells the packed, hard dirt surface of the street. Really pleased with how that turned out. But as far as the first part of this video is concerned, that's it. That's all it took for me to build this. Now I will say it definitely took me a day or two of pretty deliberate work, making sure that I got this board done. And it's only a 30-inch by 24-inch board, but I will tell you the results are fantastic. I absolutely exceeded my expectations for this. And it was one of those things where after I had finished and was looking at it, part of me was like, now I'm leaning 100% into the camp of build your own because they look so good. But then it got into time to start writing out these comparisons. So now let's start talking about building a board versus buying a gaming mat. What do you think about everybody like, commenting, and subscribing? Do you think that's a good idea? Yeah. Okay. So starting with building your own board, I would say the number one reason why you would want to build your own board is looks. No matter how much I try to convince myself otherwise, if you look at the difference between the built board and the gaming mat, it's just no questions asked for me. The looks of the built board is 100% better than the gaming mat. Now, the gaming mat will have its advantages as far as looks goes, because sometimes maybe you don't know how to craft something to make it look the way that a gaming mat looks. You know, that certain things in that department are very difficult to do, or maybe you don't feel like you have the energy to put into being creative to try and make something. But just in this example, city street to city street, the looks of the built board are way better. Now let's talk about something that is way better in the gaming mat department. The gaming mat, its storage is no questions asked absolutely better than the built gaming board. And I'll tell you, this might be a deal breaker for most people. If you live in a city, like in an apartment, or you have a townhouse, or you have restricted space where you can store your gaming materials, like most of us do, storage is a huge reason to want to decide between two of these options. And the fact that the Frontline Gaming Mats come with the bags, they come with the tags, you can roll them up easy and put them away and then pull them out after a year and they still lay flat to the table and everything is perfect, Let me tell you, that is a huge advantage. Where this gaming board, I only have one of these. I've made a lot of dungeon tiles, but this is the first gaming board that I've ever made. And I'll tell you, I don't know where I'm gonna store it. I'm still confused as to what I'm gonna do. It's probably just going to end up setting on top of my stack of rolled up Frontline Gaming Mats, a 100% win in the storage column for the Frontline Gaming Mats. So now let's start to get into some of the stuff that's a little bit more of a gray area. So we're gonna start with cost. So I did the math on how much building this board cost. I did it kind of split up into two different ways. I did it one, if you've never built something before and this is the first thing that you're building, how much would it cost to get you started? Now I didn't include tools. Disclaimer, this is in my area in the US. I'm sure there are all kinds of costs in other places of the world. This is just specifically for my situation where I am in the world. And disclaimer, the foam, the XPS foam, to buy a sheet of it, if I didn't have any, would be $19.55. I will have scrap left over, but $19.55. We're looking at $3.28 in sand. We're looking at $3.26 in Eileen's tacky glue, $1 in foam core, somewhere around $3.50 for 7 different colors of craft paint. And then lastly, we're looking at $7.97 for a bottle of matte Mod Podge, bringing our total up to $38.56. Now I looked up on Frontline's website and they actually have a 30 by 22 inch mat, so it's gonna be 2 inches shorter on one side. That mat comes in at a cost of $30 US. Automatically in this department, I'm putting another check into the column of buying a gaming mat. It's just cheaper. Now, if you already own the materials, I did a little bit more of a calculation what you would have to spend in materials, and that's a little bit more manageable. It was only $5 or so in XPS insulation foam, $1 in sand, $1.50 in glue, 50 cents in foam core, $1 in craft paint, and $2 in Mod Podge. That brings my total up to $11 for this board. So if you already have the materials, to me, that makes it a lot more manageable. Plus, it is a lot cheaper, $20 cheaper than the $30 gaming mat from Frontline. But that is not the only cost to consider. The next one is time, and I think this is a pretty big one for me. When it came to building this board, and this wasn't including dry time, but my time invested in building this board was 4.5 hours. Now you might be faster, you might be slower. Of course, everyone's crafting is different, and I cannot highly enough say, do not compare your time crafting to my time crafting. This isn't a contest, but for me, it was 4.5 hours of time working on this mat, where it only cost me 10 minutes of time to sign on to Frontline's website and pick out the mat that I want and order it. I've got to wait a little bit longer for it to show up, but honestly, like my local gaming store sells Frontline Gaming Mats, so I could just go out there, pay a couple of dollars more per mat, and have a mat in a 20-minute drive. That is an absolute win in the column for Frontline Gaming Mats, and the reason that I say that is because I now get to spend more time building the terrain that sits on top of those mats instead of just worrying about the surface that I'm going to be playing on. To me, that's a huge deal, and I can spend more time focused on my games and specific set pieces for my games than worried about just the board or the mat that the terrain is set on. The next big thing to talk about is durability. And durability is another one that I think is gonna push into a check mark for the Frontline Gaming Mats, because no matter how much I seal my piece up, no matter how much I try to be careful with it, a foam board is a foam board, and enough pressure placed or a metal mini dropped onto it is enough to rip it. The Frontline Gaming Mats for me are just indestructible. I have used them over and over again. I have abused and mistreated them, and they still come out on top. I can't do that with a foam gaming board. Obviously, there are some major advantages to the built board. Durability is not one of them. Check goes to Frontline Gaming Mats. The last little bit of criteria that I'm going to be looking at is versatility, and this is a little bit tricky of one because versatility can be kind of looked at two ways, and I'm going to say each of these options, building and buying, has a strong positive to each. The versatility that building gives you is you can build whatever you want. You don't have to look for a specific design and settle for something that is not exactly what you want, because you're making the art style, you're making the decisions, the street can flow exactly the way that you need it to. So in this way, versatility is an absolute check mark for building your own. But on the other hand, the Frontline Gaming Mats, when you sign onto their site, they've got so many different designs. I keep saying Frontline Gaming Mats. This could be any gaming mat company. They have so many different designs that maybe you wouldn't know how to craft something like that, or you don't want to spend the time to try and figure it out. To me, you can get some really awesome versatility off of just browsing on any gaming site. But specifically, I'm gonna keep using Frontline Gaming because that's the one that I know, but browsing their site, you can find some cool stuff that you wouldn't have thought of on your own. And so in that way, I think the Frontline Gaming Mats can be really, really versatile. So let's get to my final thoughts. So for my preferences, the winner comes out at buying a gaming mat. It wins with 3 checks to 2 over building a gaming board. And I really think that it comes down to just what priorities are important to you. If looks are the most important and time and cost is absolutely no option, then at that point build a mat, because unquestionably to me, the 3D board looks way cooler. But if cost and time are things that you're considering and durability is something that is, I feel like, important to everybody, then that's gonna tip over into buying a gaming mat. And for me, my preference is Frontline Gaming Mats. So with all of that said, what are some criteria that I didn't mention that you would mention? Drop that down into the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, definitely leave me a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. That goes a long way to helping the channel out. And ring the notification bell if you want to know when our videos go live every week, which is Thursdays Eastern Standard Time at noon. But that's the end of this video. Until next week, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you.